If you've had a disaster with shipping tube amps, or specifically receiving a tube amp that was shipped, let me know in the comments. This is a non-master volume silver-face twin reverb shipped from Guitar Center in Chicago to the store location in Nashville, only last December. This is a 1966 super reverb that I shipped myself from Olympia, Washington to Nashville, Tennessee in the middle of a winter storm with delays and treacherous roads, and the amp sat 3 extra days in a warehouse and 1 extra day on a truck attempting to be delivered only to be returned before final delivery the following day, which was perfect. It's exactly what I wanted. The more stress in the shipping, the better the experiment was going to be, compared to traveling only a few hundred miles from a store location in Chicago to a store location in Nashville. Unfortunately, and I might even say tragically, when you consider that there's a finite amount of vintage gear in the world, the Guitar Center disaster was not singular. It happened to a friend I was helping get into his first vintage amp quite recently, and after that, I began talking to other people about their experiences. Turns out that the owner of the Super Reverb had the exact same thing happen to him. In his case, it was a 1965 twin that had been shipped from Atlanta and arrived in his words with, quote, an absolutely wrecked baffle board, speakers in a pile on the bottom of the cabinet, and of course one of the cones torn. The Super Reverb found me. I didn't find it, and it was literally down a dirt road on Hood Canal in Brennan, Washington. He had just spent a large sum of money to have the land drilled for a well. At 300 feet, they still hadn't hit water. On the website, I wrote a series of 6 articles under the blog section on the public, completely free side of Fretboard Playground. And if you really want to read every single detail, it's all right there. There's a link in the description. But the 2 most essential core concepts, if you don't have time or interest to read 6 articles, is number 1, it's the weight that causes the problems. Shipping these inside of a box with some bubble wrap and hoping for the best is the equivalent of shipping a bowling ball inside of a box and wondering, why did it tear things apart? I first learned this the hard way, receiving a German turntable, which is my parallel passion, vintage dual turntables. And when I opened the box, it was like a joke out of a mighty wind. The spindle was quite literally teetering crazily on the turntable. What had happened quite simply is the heavy platter had jackhammered the bearing support completely out of the assembly. It's the same with a guitar amp. Transformers are heavy. Speakers are heavy. And specifically, 1960s vintage Fender amplifiers, the cabinets were just made of pine, covered in Tolex. The power transformer in particular, at the edge of the chassis, can do the exact same thing to a cabinet that happened to my Dual turntable coming from Canada. There's a reason that Dual originally shipped their turntables with the platter removed from the chassis and cushioned. I don't have any evidence conclusively whether or not it's true, but have heard that originally Fender shipped their amplifiers upside down so that the weight was on the bottom. We can't count on UPS or FedEx even keeping a box upright in 2026, even if you put a "this side up" label on it. So the first thing is, I eliminated the weight. It works a whole lot better if you pull the chassis and ship it separately from the cabinet. In the blog, I explain exactly how to do that. And in this case, the chassis had already been pulled incorrectly previously, and the front faceplate was predictably a little bit bent up. I used some techniques to straighten out the faceplate then and there. But when pulling the chassis, just be careful to make sure that you don't snag the faceplate on the grill cloth once it's out of the cabinet, with the tubes removed, I should add. You've got half the weight of the amplifier, and the chassis itself can no longer jackhammer a cabinet apart. And when I was talking with the previous caretaker of the Super Reverb, he just said straight up, Guitar Center shouldn't be allowed to ship vintage amps. Also consider that the finger jointing from Fender was a bit sloppy to begin with. I spoke with Will at Amarillo Amp Works, and he told me Fender had a joint cutting machine that would cut all the joints on one edge of the board at the same time, and would blow out one side of the joints. But the second core concept is that shifting and shipment is just as bad as dropping. So you want it packed so that there is absolutely no way whatsoever for things to shift inside the boxes. I had an unfair advantage in that I was able to go to a Uline warehouse. But if there wasn't a Uline warehouse, you probably have a Home Depot. And even more so than getting perfect boxes of the perfect dimensions, eliminating shifting, along with eliminating weight, is the most important part. At Home Depot, you can get sheets of 2-inch thick rigid foam. I got the stuff with the foil backing. If this sounds like it's getting too expensive, consider that when I went to the FedEx store, it was going to be $100, I wasn't going to be able to watch them, and I wasn't going to be able to give them any directions. Meanwhile, a sheet of foam was maybe $30 to $35. The foam was then cut to size, essentially building a box within a box, which was then packed with the third main principle: pack it like you expect it to be handled by Godzilla. The chassis then went by itself into this foam house, further padded by bubble wrap and soft foam. An additional sheet of soft padding was placed on top. The key is that nothing can move. It's surrounded and padded on all sides, so there is a little bit of a gap here, even down here between the edge of the chassis and the power transformer. Put some cushioning in there. And then with all of this, I'm going to put a padding on top. So you've got soft padding on all sides, encased within the rigid foam top, bottom, and sides. This should form a perfect fit so that shifting is impossible. And of course, you want your dimensions to be perfectly measured, and it can't go anywhere. Then the cabinet went into another box, recalling George's story about the baffle board that had been damaged in shipment. The amp found me with Eminence little buddies in it, but he'd also saved the original CTS Alnicos, all in need of a recone, but providing them with the sale. So I was going to have to ship speakers either way. I went ahead and removed the speakers as well, and all the weight was gone once the reverb tank was also removed. The cabinet, by itself, went into another large box, which was more or less triple boxed. Cardboard around the cabinet, surrounded by bubble wrap, surrounded by the rigid foam, with no room whatsoever for it to shift at all. And then surrounding all this was the outer box. The speaker shipment was able to use the exact same size box that I was able to get from Uline, and I was able to pack that and pad it so that the fit was perfect. The reverb tank, which is original, and the tubes, which he had some nice stuff in there. Amperex, Jan Phillips, General Electric. Every single one of those tubes arrived safely. On the blog, I show specifically, with the tubes, you want soft padding around them. The rigid foam is specifically for the top, bottom, and sides of the main outer shipping box, but the tubes themselves, as well as every other individual shipment, whether the chassis, the cabinet, the reverb tank, or the speakers, should be padded with soft, cushioning material. The previous owner was a kindred spirit who had purchased the amplifier from Emerald City Guitars in 2008. We talked about RCA black plates, the transition to digital modeling and profilers overtaking the guitar culture, his experiences moving to Austin, trying to make it as a blues guitar player, and finding out how hard it is, and finding a plot of land that he'd purchased back in the Pacific Northwest from a recording studio owner that he knew, and his dreams to build on that land, and at 340 feet, they hit water. Now he needs a pump, and when he asked me, as he was helping me load the super out into the car, "How are you going to get that back to Nashville?" I promised him, it'll get there completely safely. It will not go onto a shipping truck unless this thing is packed bomb-proof, and that he would always know it went to a player who cares for these things. That I wasn't looking for a deal to flip it and make some extra cash. This was perhaps the single greatest experience that I've ever had finding and buying vintage gear. It was like everything else before this led up to this moment, and every single one of those shipments arrived safely. In the blog, I go into greater detail, photographing the condition of the boxes upon receipt and validating everything inside was 1000% safe, in the exact condition that I purchased the amplifier in. Does this increase the cost of shipment? Of course. Some people will say, I've certainly heard them say, you need them to pack it if you want them to honor an insurance claim. Well, maybe if it's broken, you have a stronger leg to stand on if the FedEx store packed it. But was there any concern whatsoever about this amplifier getting to me safely? Essentially none. What do they know about tube amps? And why, when I dropped it off in midday, was literally the first thing I saw, that speaker box being taken by a FedEx worker, and with my own two eyes, I saw it lifted up and rotating 360 degrees into the truck. The way I packed it, I was completely unconcerned. So the insurance was primarily for in case they lost anything. As I've mentioned before, the gravy train of free guitar lessons on this channel is officially over. That's all shifting over to courses on the website. But I'll pop up again, here and there, from time to time on YouTube, with things like this that I just think are valuable, worthwhile public service announcements and ways that we can do better. I sincerely hope that it helps somebody. As Joni Mitchell once said about her own songs, I hope you found them useful. That's the reason I tried to do this at all.